Welcome, and thank you for joining me. My name is Damaris Kaufman. I'm a Vice Dean and Professor at the Bartlett, University College London's top-ranked faculty of the built environment. We are honored and humbled today to host Gracelynn and Albert Haymer, two American retired postmasters who struggled to become Black architects in America because of the insuperable barriers they faced in two very different institutions. Today, we interview them about their experiences. Albert sought to attend the Illinois Institute of Technology, what he regarded as the top program in the country, where he wished to train as an architect. His wife, Gracelynn, pursued architectural education a decade later in Colorado, intending to become an architectural technician and architectural engineer. Their experiences tell us much about the challenges African American students faced in America as they struggled to qualify as architects. We hope, insofar as institutions in the English-speaking world, not just the United States, but also Great Britain and elsewhere, reckon with their own legacies of structural racism in architectural education, that listening to Gracelynn and Albert will help you understand the challenges that we all face in trying to improve access and inclusion in a profession that we all hold dear. Thank you.
I'm Judy Stephenson. I'm Professor of Economic History of the Built Environment at the Bartlett. Today, I'm joined by Al, Gracelynn Haymer, two students of architecture in the US in the 1970s, am I right?
And 80s.
And 80s, okay. 80s. But you're going to talk to us for Black History Month about your experiences. Thanks. We're really grateful for you taking the time. So, first of all, tell me a little bit about your respective backgrounds, your choice of architecture as, a pursuit to study, and maybe how your backgrounds inform that. Al?
Okay. Well, I was pretty good in high school in my drafting, and my father was a carpenter by trade, and I worked with him, so the two kind of got me interested in architecture. And we worked on a lot of homes. So I wanted to go into residential design and architecture exclusive.
Which is, the height of sort of creative, it's a sort of nexus of creative input, architectural, residential design. Were you thinking public housing? Were you thinking the housing of the elite? What were you going to be designing?
Well, probably the housing of the elite,
Yeah.
And that was one of the first things we learned, to take people that we were working for into respect of what they actually wanted and the best design for them and living conditions. So the ideals of design and the ideal of living standards informed your kind of choice? Yeah.
Kind of publicly motivated?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Gracelynn, your motivation for architecture?
Mine came from my family as well. I have a family of architects and construction. And my dad was a mechanic, but I was always intrigued with how the cars work. I was intrigued with the mechanical part of things, but I was also intrigued with the architect of New York. So that's what caught my eyes, the tall buildings, and even the ones here in London, because of their, detailed art in every building that you see. Like, we're on the streets now, we're walking, and I see all of the art. So my eye is mostly on the art.
So it's the decorative aspects of architecture, particularly in
the detail of the architect. How was that done? The very detailed, right down to the,
the pretty stuff.
Precise.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so that was the motivation for you. So
that and coming living in Denver, Colorado, they don't have tall buildings.
Oh, okay.
Back in the 70s and 80s, so they had maybe 4 floors. 4 levels.
Just like London.
Right. Well, London has more than 4, but maybe 5 or 6. But I was intrigued with the tall buildings.
Okay. So, Al, you famously or otherwise, but you studied at an extremely prestigious institution, Illinois Institute of Technology, in the 1970s. Tell us about why you chose that school and your experience of applying and being admitted. You know, how was it at that point for you?
Well, after I graduated high school, I wanted to stay in the area because I lived with my parents.
You were brought up in Chicago.
In Chicago, and it was actually University of Chicago Circle Campus then. They renamed it in the 80s, but when I went, it was Circle Campus, you know. And that way I could study and still be close to home to help out at home, you know, whatever, you know, was needed there. And I got an Illinois State scholarship the first year. Then after that, nothing. So I actually worked full-time, and I went to school full-time, and I paid as I went. I never got a student loan. So
there's actually a lot of students like you today. Unfortunately, they're also forced to take loans because they can't earn enough to keep themselves. But the experience of working full-time and studying is something a lot of students today have to do, particularly students from urban backgrounds, and maybe from artisan or working class backgrounds as well. So that's of interest. So but you said you had a scholarship the first year.
Right.
So you'd come up as a student who was marked out for success?
Well, yeah, because I graduated like in the top half of my high school class, you know. So we did have a scholarship, the Illinois State Scholarship. What's the word I want to say? We was able to get that, you know, because of where we was in our rankings. So, but after that year, it was gone.
So why was the scholarship only for 1 year?
Well, at the time, we didn't realize it. That was a city college, and they had to enroll so many students and so many diverse students in there to keep the money coming in to the college.
So you were saying it's kind of like they were luring you in with the first year scholarship, but then you faced the
reality of it, you know. And by living with the parents, if you say, "Well, I'm moving out," they said, "Well, you have to be out for 2 years before you can get anything else."
Oh, I see.
You know, so it was
okay.
But I didn't have a problem working. So, you know, I worked full time, and I paid as I went because I never wanted to have student loans because I've heard how people take years and years to pay student loans. So.
Do you think it would have been easier if you'd taken the loans?
No, not really, because of the outcome.
Yeah.
I would have had the student loans and I would have never made it to graduation because they really wasn't expecting me to graduate.
So we'll talk a bit because I know you did quite well. But talk to me about what that institution, what the school, which we now know as IIT, represented to you at the time.
Well, at the time, they had some of the best, I'd say, academics, you know. At that time, back in the 70s, because I left in 73, they were on their way to France with a group of students to study there for a year.
Wow.
So they had very good academics.
And you knew that, and that was the allure.
Yeah.
You wanted the best.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. So talk to me a little, because you said about the outcome, but I understand you made the dean's list.
Yeah.
In 77, am I right?
You know, because I left in 76, but around that time in 76, I made the dean's list.
So you made the dean's list.
Yes.
Today we give out a lot of firsts and a lot of high grades, and actually we're very motivated to do this. I worked for 4 years in this faculty to try and make sure that students like you, and students from all backgrounds, had faced, no attainment gap.
Right.
But generally there are more high grades. making the dean's list in like the mid 70s, that was a hugely prestigious, but also a very elite thing to achieve. Tell us a bit about how you managed it and how it felt.
Well, I was a hard worker. I studied hard. There's many days I spent the night at school. One of our first projects where we had to make our own seating structure and our own desk out of cardboard and plywood and the conduit pipes. So I had my desk, and I had a little flap in the front where I could lay under, so I worked real hard at it, and like I said, it was a real good program. But unfortunately, when I started in 73, it was about at least 15 blacks that started with me.
And how much was as a proportion of the class? How many was that?
That was a nice percentage. I'd say maybe 20%.
Okay.
Of the class. But each quarter, one would fall out. Each quarter. So by the time 76 got there, 3 years later, I was the last black that started in 73. So they systematically got rid of blacks as time went on.
So I was going to ask about, did you face particular challenges being a black student? But what you're intimating here is there was something systematic going on. So tell me about your experience as a black student and what that meant in terms of either challenges, barriers, obstruction. So tell me about.
It was the faculty. Well, some of my professors. They straight out told me, listen, it don't matter what you do, you're only going to get a C. And I could see my work, was clearly past a C, and beyond. And I've had.
Did they explain? Or was it just a kind of hanging the obvious reason? Was there a conversation about why? Or was it just something they got to say?
It was something that they were used to doing, because it was, I drink Strohs. If you want to bribe me, bring me a case of Strohs. And I've had some that wouldn't even get too close to my desk. They would walk and, kind of peek and kept going. And that's just reality, back in the 70s.
So you were saying that your co-students, the other black students, were dropping out because they were facing the same thing. But you persisted?
I persisted. I was the last one. If you missed the class, you could potentially fall behind enough to drop out.
So what was happening to the other 80% of students?
Well, they were on a kind of different level because what actually got me out was my professor made sure I was late with a project. They had a real nice project going. The whole class as a group went out right in the area of Circle Campus, and we found a vacant lot. So as a class, we made the building on both sides of the vacant lot. And then each student had to do their own project to design the building to fit into the vacant spot there.
Okay.
So after we finished the class project, you're supposed to do a quick sketch of what you want to do. The professor okay it, then you can go out, buy your materials, and start your project. But having class like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you come in Monday, he's okay in everybody's project. He's okay. He didn't okay mine.
Oh.
He's like, oh, you could do better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay.
So you were being held back.
Right. So Wednesday come in, it's the same thing. No, this ain't good. Now, the other students that already got the approval, they went out and they're getting materials and they're making their project. I haven't even got validated yet to do mine. So they actually threw me back over a week. And after a week of doing that, the professor said, well, look, I'll draw you what to do. And I'm like, no, I can do my own. So by the time he did okay it, I'm already behind almost like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's obvious my project is going to be late. So, and he knew it, I knew it. So I told him, I'm going to be late with my project. And he, no worries, just put it on my desk.
But of course, yeah, you're late, so it's
Well,
it's
I
marked
put it
down.
on his desk, he never looked at it. He sent me 2 Fs in my major. Because we got 2 grades. And that, even though I was on the dean's list, that kicked me out of the college, which systematically threw me back a year.
Yeah.
Because they only offer certain classes during certain seasons. Like we was on the quarter system, the spring and the summer, fall, and winter. So that was, I realized everything. I was pretty upset about it. And that was actually in 75 because I remember taking out and I had never, took a break from school. I went straight through, and my father's from Mississippi. I took a break in 75. I went to Mississippi and stayed down there 3 months. So
Time out sometimes works.
well, it did, and that kind of rejuvenated me. So when I came back, I reinstated after they did the investigation. My project was still on the teacher's desk.
Oh.
He had never looked at it, so he had to send me different grades. They measure your grades. So he sent me 2 Cs, and they reinstated, but I couldn't register until the next year that time. So me working and going to 3 years to, try to get ahead, they threw me back. So,
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask Grace a little bit about her experience. Gracelynn, you were in...
Yeah, my experience was a little different because I'm a female. So, and females in the architect at that time was very few and far in between.
mm-hmm.
And my competition were men that wanted to be architects, but they didn't see no room for women. So my battle was being female and doing better than them to prove that I could be on the same platform.
So you were in Denver, Colorado,
Yeah.
at the Architectural Institute of Technology. Was it the same kind of prestigious atmosphere that was holding?
It was a little different because I was in a AIT setting, which is a technology school. So
Yeah.
it's not college or university.
Yeah.
But it was for anyone that wanted to enter into architect.
So do you feel you had... This is a story of this is act.
that's
I mean,
a story, yeah.
This is just active
Well, what
barriers
I did,
up.
Once
Yours is...
Well, in my experience was when I figured that being a female, I was told that I would never be at the same level or the same architectural platform as the men. I decided to go into theater and film.
You were told that was because you were female.
Yes, and I was told that there was very few and far in between because I wanted to be an architect in New York City with tall buildings. And so after researching, it wasn't too many female architects that held that title in New York.
Were there many women in your class at IIT?
I think it was a couple.
A couple.
Yeah. So it was,
So
there
not very
was a
many.
man's field.
Any black women?
Maybe one.
How did she do?
They all flunked out.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I was the only female out of maybe 10 males in my class.
Wow.
So I had it from all of them, from the men and the teachers, the instructors.
So you talked a little about your strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can both talk a little bit more about the strategies that you employed to to do as well as you did, and about like how you then, like, did you get your degree?
No, I never went back. I think that wasn't for me. But after I researched, I should have went to maybe a black college that kind of pushed the students and, went along with them instead of, putting up barriers for them.
I know this is a thing for students today from different backgrounds, from BME backgrounds particularly.
Right.
They feel that it's a great thing to come to the prestigious institution, and then they feel that they're different, so that they'd be better off in a place which, just catered to people like them, or, they think. Do you really think that's the case? I mean, what you've experienced is discrimination at its most overt and worst, and its most rigid, perhaps. But would it have been? You would have been better in the 1970s somewhere else.
I would have finished if I was in a more suitable environment. It's hard enough doing architecture. Because once I got into calculus, that was like, I had to really buckle down to get there. But if I'd have been in a college that they helped the students and pushed the students instead of pushing them back, and I feel maybe the black colleges would have done that.
So at the time, the black colleges were doing that more.
Mm-hmm.
And I went into theater and film, which was universal for me because stage design is still architect, and I had more creativity to do what I wanted to create. And it didn't have to be on a scale to scale, you could offset it, depend on the stage I was designing. So I did black box, I did different stage designs. So it was very interesting to me and very rewarding too. So that kind of took away from me going into school and becoming the #1 architect of the world, female.
It's interesting the different experiences that gender overlay on this, and that you had an outlet in a different area in the creative theater. Tell me a little bit about the legacy, about your subsequent career, and how your experience as a student in the 1970s in architecture has informed that.
Well, I kind of had a different outlook on life and career and this, that, and other. So it mostly was for me to find a good job with good benefits.
You found a good job, right?
Yeah, about, let's say 80. Well, in the 80s, well, actually 77, 78, I started working with the postal system.
Yeah.
But I became a career in 1980.
Yeah.
So I wound up doing 33 years there.
So a steady job.
Right, with good benefits.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. And the legacy for you was your work in the theater? Okay.
I worked in the theater about 4 years in New York City, Hunter College. And then I moved back home. I did some modeling, but then I moved back home and ended up at the post office.
Oh.
And that's where we met. Post office.
Pennsylvania.
So it wasn't just steady. Okay, so tell me a little bit about what you would advise students who are, like you, Black students, but also students from like urban environments, artisan, working class environments, different environments, who are coming to, study architecture, study the built environment in prestigious places, and where they want to succeed today. What advice would you give them?
Well, I tell them to do their homework, do background checks on the college they want to go to, and talk to upperclassmen in that field to see, what the challenges are, and if they, would be able to handle that. Instead of just going blindly into it and saying, well, this is what I want to do or whatever. They should do their homework, kind of have an idea what they're really getting into.
find out what the chances of them yielding something from their thing are. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Any advice from you, Gracelynn?
I would say in anything that you do, you do, of course, you do your homework, but also to be active in the community where you're going to go, because that's important too, to know where you're going to go, because that kind of seems to be your second home.
Yeah.
So you want to be comfortable in that, and
So-
meeting people, and seeing what's going on in the area and how you could keep it moving.
Yeah. Okay.
But don't stop and don't give up. That's what I tell them.
My last advice would be, it don't count if you don't finish. Because all those years that I put in the time, like I said, I had about 89 hours and I needed like 125 to graduate. I mean, that's experience personal, but it didn't help my career. It didn't,
So it don't count if you don't finish.
Unless you finish.
So to finish.
That's great advice, but
Yeah.
in so many ways. I just want to say, as an economic and social historian, hearing you tell us about your experience really brings home, I hope, for students and others in the faculty today, what the reality of real discrimination and real in a very negative sense brings about. And I hope it can inspire us to. First of all, I'm an optimist, so I believe we're not facing that these days. But there are always little elements, and they could have the same legacy on different people. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
And for telling us about it. And I'd love to have seen your cardboard desk. Thank you.
I have some.
Thank you, Gracelynn.
I have some of his work too. If you want to see.
I want to see your sets.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today to hear about the experiences of Albert and Gracelynn Haymer as they attempted to negotiate architectural education as Black students in modern America. The events that you heard narrated in this film largely coincide with the lifetimes of your parents. As all of you know, the racial barriers to becoming an architect discussed in this interview are also faced by Black students in the United Kingdom. Institutions like the Illinois Institute of Technology and the Bartlett at University College London have a shared legacy with which we've only begun to reckon. We hope that through listening to Al and Grace's accounts, you'll come away with a better understanding of the challenges they faced and the extent to which those challenges transcended not only race, but also socioeconomic background and gender. The intersectionality of inclusion in elite education is a challenge that we face going forwards, but to face it squarely, we must reckon with the past. Thank you.